was convinced that his experiment did detect living microbes in 76. A civilization came from Mars to the Earth and either created human beings here or was involved in human development or had some very significant effect on human development that may have already been going on.
So hi, my name is Anthony Beckett and I'm here with Andrew Johnson, and we're going to move on now to talking about Mars. And how long ago was it you published this book, Secrets in the Solar System?
That would have been 2017 that I finished that book and put it online.
Mars has been on your radar for a long time as being research. What got you interested in Mars specifically? Obviously, as I said in the book there and on other interviews, I've always been interested in astronomy. So I knew all the names of the planets when I was about 10, and what the sort of relative sizes were and things like that. But really, and I looked at Mars through a telescope, more than once. And there was another guy at school that was quite interested, so we had occasional conversations about that. But it was really going on from there when I started to look at the Disclosure Project back in 2003, and I started to find stuff about Mars. Obviously, I found the Face on Mars stuff, which you've done many videos on. I've done one or two, and we may mention that here today. But so I found the face stuff, and I'd sort of seen some of that. But then it was particularly when we got onto the Mars Global Surveyor images, which I hadn't really seen up until I got broadband internet access back in 2003, even though they'd been around for a few years by then. And I discovered that dome, which I've used as my avatar, the Mars dome, and you should hold the book cover up there. So that's the Mars dome, and that picture on the cover there was taken in 2008 by the HiRISE probe from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. So that's a later image. So when I saw the MGS version of that back in 2003, that kind of blew me away, and I wondered what it was. So that's really what got me interested in looking at the more detailed Mars stuff, which had come out in the time I hadn't really been following the astronomy news in detail. You've been interested in UFOs prior to this?
Oh yes,
so it was UFOs that led you down to look at the anomalies in the solar system? Yeah,
essentially. I mean, back in 2003, I was looking at the UFO stuff, and that led me to the Mars stuff,
Okay, cool. So Mars Global Surveyor arrived, was it 1999, I think? Or
I think it was 98, I think 98? It actually got there, yes.
So it was a few years before you... So it was, and it was, you just said it was... Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project that led you towards. Was there anything in this, I can't recall actually, but was there anything in Disclosure Project's testimony that specifically mentions Mars?
There was, and I think that, I don't know whether it was that triggered me looking for the Mars stuff, but there's a particular witness that Greer quotes called AH, those are his initials, he doesn't give his name, the one who's got his back to the camera. And this testimony is still on YouTube, you can go and listen to the guy. And he did... From my reading of what he said, I thought he was telling the truth. And he said that the face on Mars, NASA knew all about it, really, and all this PR they'd done was just bogus. They knew that it was created by a race 45,000 years ago, and they came to the Earth. And they knew all of this, and all this stuff about...
testimony, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. There's a couple of specific details that he gives, which I think, give him a bit more credence. So that, I can't remember whether it was that when I'm coming across that, and I then went to look for the Mars stuff, more of it, or whether I was already looking, and that just was in part and parcel of all of the stuff that I was finding.
There's controversy around the discovery of the face, obviously, but I mean, the face itself is controversial. But the things that NASA's spokesperson, PR people, and senior, principal scientists have said have been problematic, if I'm being fair. So, I'm thinking specifically of, I can't remember the guy's name, sorry.
Soffen?
Soffen, Jerry Soffen, yeah. Was it Mark Carlotta reports about Jerry Soffen?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, you when we spoke about this years ago, Anthony, it was I think you at that point, when we first spoke about this, we're going back probably almost 10 years now, maybe longer, I think you knew, you'd researched it but then more than I had, because I'd never heard of this Jerry Soffen guy, and I do mention him in the book, and that he basically said that they'd had this picture of the face, and they'd taken a second picture, and there wasn't a face, and
specifically said hours later, which was impossible given where the orbiters were.
You did research it and you did remember. So exactly, yes, that's exactly true. And he said they took a second picture about 3 hours, or 4 hours, or 10 hours later, whatever it was. And of course, we know that that's not true because the probe was 10,000 miles away, halfway around the planet on another orbit, and it was nowhere near Cydonia. He was the mission controller. He should have known that, and if he didn't know that, that was a bad show on his part.
At the very least, there's some spin going on, is what you can say from that.
Exactly.
From a certain perspective, you can probably think, well, these are... If you're looking at any kind of scientific discipline within any kind of academic research and stuff, there's always people protecting their own nest egg.
Turf, yes, yeah.
And so do you think that could be part of it? Because, I mean, one thing that happened towards... Well, quite a few years later, actually, after the rediscovery of the face by Dupuytren and Molyneux, wasn't it? Back about 4 years later.
And John Brandenburg, he was involved in that. Yeah.
So those, they named themselves the Mars Investigation.
That's right,
team,
Mars Investigation Team. Yeah.
And I think what my understanding is that at the very least, there was a bit of some feathers were ruffled by the fact that these guys, independent people, were coming along and presenting this data, and NASA hadn't done anything of the sort.
That's right. I mean, if you read the literature for that, and I quote some of that in the book.
This is at formal conventions. It's not like it just like...
No. I mean, the Mars Investigation Team, they did something then which I don't think could happen now.
I completely agree.
Yeah, they forced NASA to actually speak out about some of the findings in a meaningful way, and they actually got... they got certain statements out of NASA, which I don't think you get these days, and they forced them.
What statements were these? Do you recall?
Well, just in fact, maybe not statements out of NASA. Maybe I'm sort of misspeaking there. Really, what I mean is that they got enough interest from people in government to actually force NASA to re-image the face. I think that's mainly what came out of it when they did. In other words, they got the Viking imagery from the 70s, from 76 onwards, which was what they originally had the face image in, and they were able to, through people in government, force NASA to re-photograph the face with the Mars Global Surveyor mission in, I think, 2001, was it, or 1999? I think they did it twice. They did two re-photographs with Mars Global Surveyor, and it was really the work of the Mars Investigation Team that kind of forced NASA into that position. They weren't going to bother with it otherwise.
Merlin Space Science Systems didn't want to do it. It was actually... I think it was specifically paid specifically to do that act. Actually,
something like that. Without going and rereading the section.
He didn't want to, but the people wanted it, and it was requested, so he had to do it. So I was just thinking, at a certain point, the data that came from NASA was in the hands of the Merlin Space Science Systems, the contractor who handled the cameras specifically.
That's right.
And if you go to the website is msss.com.
Correct.
And so one of the problems that people have reported is now NASA don't have ownership of the photographs that come from the space probes. Back in, say, 10 years ago, around the Mars Global Surveyor, beginning of this Mars rover exploration, they were the ones, that company owned a proprietary
That's right.
Of the
and they received a lot of criticism for that from certain people, like, Richard Hoagland said, well, why have you given over ownership of these images to these private contractors and he rightly said they could withhold the images for 6 months. That was written into their contract. And and say, no, you're not having any of these images, even though you've paid for them. As US citizens, we're not going to release them until we feel like it.
Do you think, in a sense, NASA might have painted themselves into a corner by taking certain attitudes?
Well, I think their actions were quite deliberate. They.
So you see it's more nefarious?
Yeah, I think so, because I think all that they're doing is they're trying to protect their own sources of funding.
Okay, that's actually what I was thinking about.
And I mean, not just that, there are other things going on as well. I do, as I say in the book, it's clear, I think, when you look at the evidence that somebody, either within NASA in the top levels or whoever's directing NASA, knows, that there is a story that they're not allowed to talk about.
But what is that story, though? Because you made reference to the, was it AH, was he? The guy from
the
Disclosure Project?
That's part of the story. That is part of the story.
But what part of the story? Is this a real, true part of the story?
I think it is, yes, I think it is. And I think, as I say towards the end, I mean, we're sort of jumping ahead in the book, but as I say in the book, and I've said in some of my talks, if you watch that film from 2000, Mission to Mars, that's the one with Gary Sinise and Tim Robbins. If you watch that film, it's a fairly boring film up until about the last half an hour. Just watch the last half an hour. I mean, some of it's on YouTube, I think. And I think, as I say in the book, there are disclosures about what that story is that NASA are protecting. There are certain disclosures in that film, I think. I mean, Hoagland's hinted at this as well.
The disclosure being
that a civilization came from Mars to the Earth and either created human beings here or was involved in human development or, had some very significant effect on human development that may have already been going on the Earth at the time they came here. That part of the story is less clear.
As far as disclosure process goes, you're saying this is more evidence towards it being Hollywood TV media being used as a source to feed the information out rather than actually having actual disclosure.
Correct.
Through official
They feed it out in a fictional format, so that the public doesn't really know what to believe. And so whilst they've disclosed some of the information, the public don't really understand the disclosure because they don't have the background to understand. They've not been told how to, what the context is and stuff.
This takes us back to the Brookings Institute report, doesn't it? Prior to, when was that commissioned? That was like before the moon landings and everything, wasn't it? So it's like 1966.
Yeah, around about then, mid-60s, or late 60s.
And
I mentioned that in the book as well, the Brookings report. Yeah, they basically came up with this statement that what if they discovered extraterrestrial life? What should they do? And how would that play out in the public arena? And some people actually misquote. I found that some people have misquoted the Brookings report really, because it doesn't say in the Brookings report, oh, if we discover extraterrestrial life, in the space program, which was getting going in the mid-60s, as we know. It was quite prescient. They were doing a sensible thing. The space program was getting going. Scientists were looking at things in space and had the opportunity to see things that had never been seen before. The probes going, Mariner probes and all that, and the lunar probes and stuff. So they had to, what if we did discover evidence of aliens? What would we do? And that's basically all that part of the Brookings Institution report said. And it's a very long report. There's only one little bit. There's only like a half a page or 2 pages or something that talks about the extraterrestrial life thing. And all they said in that report is, these are the options, these are what we could do. And one of those options said, one option might possibly be that we'd consider covering it up. That's all they say. They don't say, yes, we would cover it up if we found it. Yeah. They say that one possible option that we might consider is covering it up. And they don't say cover it up, but they'd say something like withhold the information, or we basically withhold it from the public.
Do they not say that they speculate about what the best course of action would be as well, about for social engineering perspective?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, they're looking at trying to anticipate what the effects would be, and therefore, based on what they anticipate the effects would be, what they might do to mitigate any negative effects, which isn't the same as saying, yes, we would cover it up. They don't actually say that. And that's the bit that some people have misquoted. The Brookings report doesn't say, oh yes, if we discovered extraterrestrial life in the space program, we cover it up. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. That's my take on that too. And this Stanley Kubrick claimed as well that, claims that it's in his film 2001. It actually makes specific reference to Brookings, if I remember rightly.
Oh, does he? I don't remember. That's a long time since I've watched 2001.
Maybe it's not specifically Brookings, but they actually mentioned the process that is in the Brookings report, which was only around this a year earlier.
Yeah, right. I'm not familiar with that.
And the conspiratorial angle of the lunar base scenes is based around the Brookings report, supposedly, according to Kubrick. According to some sources, and even if it wasn't, it's still very, very close enough to make you think, I knew what he's talking about. But as far as the disclosure process goes, that would be, the Brookings suggests we should be looking at other social mechanisms for getting people to know about these things. So do you think that's something that's happened then? Basically straight out of Brookings, do you think that's part of the process?
It could be. I mean, that's very difficult to say. I think all you can say is what's actually happened. And I think there's been a very clear pattern has emerged particularly going back to the discoveries from Mars specifically. There's been a very clear and observable pattern which has emerged, because we're going to talk about the progress from the water to the life and stuff, weren't we? So which feeds into what I was going to say in terms of not so much a Brookings recommendation, but this clear pattern has emerged over the years with the so-called discoveries from Mars. The official, NASA statements about what they've discovered on Mars have followed a pattern, a clear pattern.
I'm saying yes, but I'm not quite sure which pattern you mean actually.
Well, I mean, we're talking about the discovery of water initially, aren't we? Because
so the idea that it was discovered. The thing about the discovery of water, it happened too many times to be taken seriously.
That's the pattern that I mean. That's the pattern that I'm referring to.
It's like one step forward, 2 steps back.
Correct.
Kind of thing, right?
Correct.
Because if we go back to discuss the Viking missions, like we did.
Okay. Yes.
Because one of the what's kind of seems to be the case from my perspective is that what we really have is that Brookings wasn't really, it mentions extraterrestrial life, but really we're talking about intelligent extraterrestrial life.
Right. That's the
wild card. The
correct. Yeah, we didn't really put that word in.
We didn't clarify, but that's what that's about.
That's what we mean. Yeah.
However,
Exactly.
The problem is, if you find extraterrestrial life of any kind, you're a step closer to the realization
the intelligent
that it's
bit
more
of it.
likely to be that we're
Yeah.
not alone, and that's the problem. So the suggestion is that would we just keep? Well, not cover up is the wrong word. We said they wouldn't. They didn't say they were going to cover up. However, if you're going to have a slow, controlled release of something to not shock a population, at what point do you start paying attention to the other data that's coming in, which is maybe I consider maybe why some of the data that came back from Viking, such as the evidence for discovering bacterial life on Mars, for example, that came with Viking, was eventually rejected. Can you tell us a bit more about your take on biology experiments?
Well, I mean, that's it. I mean, that's fairly well established with Gilbert Levin's research that he did this labelled release experiment. And they had about 3 life detection experiments on Viking, didn't they? They had the labelled release, the pyrolytic release, and then there was another one as well. Yeah, gas exchange. I couldn't remember. And the other 2, I think one of them, I think it was a pyrolytic release, did produced a false result.
It was unclear whether it was abiotic. That was the difference. He couldn't prove it was biological.
Yeah. So the dispute arose, and they basically trashed.
And it was very low signal as well. It was a very low signal to noise on.
Yeah. So they basically said no. They initially announced a positive result with the Viking lander and said, yes, we've done this label release experiment, Gilbert Levin's experiment. Yes, it detected this radioactive carbon in the respirated CO2 from the bacteria, and therefore that had meant that the life had digested the nutrients something
into the atmosphere in that container, some mechanism. So
and Gilbert Levin, he verified all the results over several years, and he was convinced that his experiment did detect living microbes in 76.
So according to their own criteria, they discovered life in 1976.
Correct.
Well, then what happened?
Well, then they sort of said about a year later, no, it was a non-biological explanation, and they'd already worked out that the original experiment was wrong, and so they hadn't discovered life after all. They still didn't know, that there was life. And they did that, and then they kind of did a similar thing with the water, because they released this picture in 1976 of water ice frost taken from the Viking lander. So, again, we're getting these sort of baby steps. Yes, we've talked about bacteria. Yes, we've talked about water, because if you can discover liquid water at room temperature, if you've got liquid water, you're much more likely to have life. So those 2 things kind of go hand in hand. So they announced the picture of water ice, in other words. That was the first picture, and then as I go through in the book, they announced in year 2000 initially. I think that was the first one. I think the discovery of liquid water was announced in year 2000, and that was the edge of a crater. Yeah, the stain marks on the edge of a crater. And I don't think I ever even became aware of that announcement, but when I was before I had internet, I only had dial-up then, I didn't have broadband. I never heard about that. I don't think it even made the news. And then we had the announcement of the discovery of liquid water again. I think it was, the next one was round about 2004. Then we had the same announcement again in 2005. Then we had the same announcement again in 2011.
Wasn't the 2011 one, was that not the year that Michael Malin Space Science Systems lost the contract?
It might well have been.
And it was the press release after lost the contract where they had this big announcement that they just discovered.
Yeah, I think it may well have been that they had a big press conference around then. But the point is that they were announcing this discovery of liquid water 11 years later than the first discovery of it. So they just kept re-announcing the same news. And again they went, that means if we've got liquid water, it increases the chances of finding life. Which was what they'd said in 1976.
Same story.
And we got the same story again in 2004 in a different form with the discovery of methane, as we were saying, Vittorio Formasano, who worked for ESA. And he said they discovered evidence of methane in the atmosphere, and that was significant because of the UV radiation that comes into Mars from the sun. If there's any methane, that would be broken down within 7 hours or something, or maybe 24 hours, I'm not sure. But Formisano said that the Mars Express spectroscopic analysis that they'd done from the Mars Express probe, which went up in 2002 or something, and had been going around on Mars for a couple of years by then, they said that they discovered formaldehyde and methane. And again,
biomarker signatures out there.
Biomarker signatures, bacterial life, blah, blah, blah. Same thing as in 1976. And then we got that announced again in 2009. There was an announcement that came out in the press that they discovered methane in the atmosphere of Mars. I think it was 2009. We've got all the dates in the book. And there was no mention of Formisano's 2004 findings. And that's another thing you'll find. If you read the reports, there is no mention of the previous discovery. Like, for example, if you read the 2011 report, it doesn't say this is just confirms what we found in 1976. And if you read the 2004 or the 2005 discovery of water, it doesn't say this confirms what we found 4 years ago. It doesn't say that.
You just reminded me of something, actually. I think back in the maybe late 60s, early 70s, I forget when, but they actually discovered evidence for methane in the...
You're right, yes.
Back in the 60s or 70s.
Yeah, that's right. Mariner did. You're absolutely right.
They lost the instrument calibration data. And guess when they rediscovered the instrument calibration data?
Oh, tell me.
2004, after the discovery of...
Well, there you go. There you go. Again, jumping ahead just to 2012, they had exactly the same thing with the Curiosity rover. They said that they discovered methane, and that was evidence for bacterial action. And then a year later, they said, no, there was no methane. That's all in the book. And that's all links, to NASA's press announcements, space.com articles, and all that stuff.
So, I mean, you use a term in the past about called muddy.
Doing a muddle up.
So it's like there's this is all regarding evidence of basic, simple life.
Yes.
You could argue microbial life, really, from Viking through to the present day and discovery.
Right. So I think so. Going back to that, and I alluded to this earlier, there's two different things going on. One is the kind of Brookings Institution type stuff where they don't really want to disclose the presence of aliens, intelligent aliens, right? So that's the one side of it. They want to not tell us about that for various reasons. But then there is the other sort of more mundane reason NASA want to keep their funding going.
Yeah.
You can give NASA all the money in the world, or ESA, or whoever, or the Indian Space Agency, or Japanese Space Agency. You can give them all the money in the world to go and look for life in the solar system, on the moon, on Mars, on Pluto, in Neptune's atmosphere, wherever it is. And if they suddenly say, yep, we've discovered it, thanks very much, right, so we're going to do something else now. They're not going to do that. They just want to keep their funding model going. So that's what I mean. There's two separate processes. NASA want to keep their funding going to look for life on Mars, or go back to the moon, or look under a rock in the asteroid belt to see if there's a bug there or something.
So just keep on looking while the money's coming in.
Yeah, so they can. It's fine to fund them looking for stuff, but it's not fine to fund them for finding stuff. So that's one of the underlying issues, which I think becomes clear when you look at the pattern. When they're going back on their own discoveries, we're not talking about aliens, we're not talking about Roswell, we're talking about NASA's own previous press results and experimental results that they're now saying are no good. Why are they no good? Or wrong or inaccurate or not of sufficient confidence, or whatever phrase they choose to use. Yeah, why?
With the Viking, it was really the first and last search for actual living life on Mars, wasn't it? Because they've got a mission going. It's a European Space Agency mission actually next year, launched in 2020, Mars 2020. It's called the Mars Exo robotic mission. Is it called?
Yeah, something like that. I haven't kept up with the very latest mission. Again, you read the mission briefs. The mission brief might have the phrase "to look for life on Mars."
Well, they're not looking for it anymore, are they? This will be the first time they're looking for evidence of former life.
Oh, I see. Okay,
so they're still not looking for life on Mars,
right? But again, you go back to one of the rover missions. It might have even been Hoagland that pointed this out. That I think that Pathfinder rover, and I think the one that went after it, the Spirit and Opportunity rovers, none of them had water detectors on them. They didn't have a device, and that's like a circuit which costs you £2 to make. I made a water detector, or my brother built me a circuit when I was about 12. A little bit of electronics. It costs you about £2.
They don't see the need or feel the need, or they don't want to risk it, perhaps.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So and so they're clearly they're straitjacketing themselves into a certain set of parameters where they're not going to go outside certain boundaries of research.
So from within the people working on these missions, you tend to get there's lots of geologists. There are very few biologists.
Correct.
And I've read a book recently by I forget whose book it was. There's someone who made the, you know, if you ask a biologist, you'll get a biological answer. Ask a geologist, you get a geological answer. So all they really have is people to, you know, if someone's going to interpret, for example, certain features on the surface of Mars, a geologist is going to tell you, well, it's this kind of rock formation, maybe it's going to erode in this kind of way.
Mean, and that gets us on to, I think, to another good point of what was on our list, which is the Alan D. Moen study about the trees.
Okay.
Because if that's, again, trees pretty harmless sort of life. It's not aliens. It's not going to come and invade you or, you know, abduct you, is it, a tree? But Alan D. Moen, he took these pictures from Mars Global Surveyor. He took this same scene, I think, which was shot on 2 different dates, and because of the 2 different dates, the sun was at different angles, and he had these strange black spots on this picture, and he made a video about this, and this is probably over 10 years old that he made this video, probably 15 by now almost. So he took I think maybe he took 4 pictures from NASA's archive from Mars Global Surveyor, the NASA's own pictures. He took the shadows, looked at how they moved between these 2 dates, worked out where the sun was, because if you've got an astronomical simulator, you can work out, you know, what angle the sun is above the horizon on Mars, so you can work out from, you know, geometry where the shadows would fall. Drew that all out. He made a 3D model on his computer, you know, with 3D Studio Max or some other type of modelling package of the day, and then he drew this all out and he put in all the numbers, and what he basically came up with from these 2 pictures is that, or 4 pictures, is that the thing that caused the shadows were trees.
Oh, is the shape of a tree.
The shape of the tree.
And this is the thing, ask a biologist, it's a tree. Ask a geologist.
And that's what he did. So that's what he did. So what he did was, he took these pictures, I forget the exact way he did it, he didn't tell them they were from Mars, and he said, I've got these pictures here, here's these 2 shots taken at different times of day or different dates and whatnot. What do you think those dots are? Or those shadows, those blotches are? And this guy who he wrote to said, oh yeah, that's bushes, that's shrubbery.
So who are these people? So who's this guy?
I don't think he names him in the book.
Well, is he a NASA or is
he was either I think he was a geologist, but he was looking at landscape.
Okay. So just generally acting.
Yeah, I think this guy was a geologist, but he was looking at landscape. He wasn't looking at like layers of rock or crystals or whatever and whatnot. He was looking at the sort of landscape thing. So he was used to looking at landscapes, and he sent him these pictures from Mars with these shadow angles, and he said, "Oh yeah, those actually shadows from bushes or shrubbery or something."
Yeah, it's indicative of
and then he told the guy that they were from Mars, and he went, okay,
that's right.
And Alan D. Moen did this study, and he used NASA data. He built his own computer model. This was exactly the sort of thing that NASA should have been doing if they were interested in finding out what was on those pictures. But of course, they hadn't. He wrote to them. They had no interest in his study.
On the surface, they have
on
no
the surface.
That's the description.
And he wrote to 500 people with that study going back 10 years. 500 of them, and I think he got 2 responses.
It's impressive attempt, actually.
You can read it. I've put it in the book. And I did a similar thing. I wrote to 42 geologists about the dome. I did that in 2004, and I got 3 people that responded, and they just ran away. They ran away from it.
So, regarding what NASA term arraigniform, you've obviously looked at arraigniform. At NASA, the spider-like things. Clark's trees. Arthur C. Clarke sees objects that he refers to. They became known as Clark's trees. You know Clark's trees.
Yeah.
NASA's. You probably lost interest like I did for a while. NASA's term was these Clark's trees are explained away as arraigniform, something that looks spider-like. Anyway, so they use the term arraigniform.
I've not heard that term.
But if you actually look up arraigniform on NASA's website, they actually look nothing like Clark's tree, to be fair. But to me, there's 2 different types of phenomena there.
Yes.
And that you covered Clark's trees in your book.
Yes.
But so what really strikes the more up-to-date version of what these Clark's trees are, according to NASA, are essentially they reckon it's some kind of it's like a geyser of ice that's come up from the ground.
There's various explanations.
But again, you're talking to geologists trying to explain something. Well, it's quite a convoluted explanation trying how you have these things when they actually look like trees.
I mean, what they seem to be able to do is obviously make up some, like you say, geyser, or it's an underground lake that's suddenly defrosted with a seasonal warming or something, and then the water's kind of filtered out in this pattern, just like that. So it happens to look like a tree or a biological form, and it's not. It's geology. So they'll basically just hand wave an explanation, and because they've got the degrees, in geology,
that gives them the authority to make things up.
Yeah, because the term that they use, areniform, the articles talk about spider-like forms, and to me, they don't look spider-like at all. They don't have 8 legs or 8 appendages. No. They're just the dendritic patterns. They look like trees.
You get a similar thing as well with the rover artifacts.
Yeah.
Where you've got these holes in rocks and these little shapes on the rocks, which you've seen on some of the
crinoid-like shapes.
Well, not so much the crinoids, but there's certain rocks that appear to have a hole in that seems to have been made by a tool, and there's one that looks like a metronome. There's a little thing that looks like a metronome in one of the rover pictures. That's in the book. That's I didn't discover that. Somebody else discovered that. Yeah. And they call these ventifacts. Ventifacts. That's the new one that I came across. That's where they have the winds. That go into.
Produces 3-sided triangular shapes.
Yeah, of some kind. Yeah. So they've apparently got an explanation for that.
Weathering phenomenon.
Weathering phenomenon, indeed. Yes. Yeah.
So. Yeah, because what struck me about the areniforms, not so much the fact that these things don't quite look like quartz trees in the first place. It was the fact that they use a term which doesn't actually describe it, rather than describe it like it would be technically, which would be dendritic patterns, which, yes, I use a term that looks like tree-like, but you could explain them as river patterns look like the same way. It's this branching effect, and that's what you have. But they don't use terminology that matched the phenomenon.
Yeah.
They use something else that just made it look ridiculous, and attach it to the idea of life, spiders in that case, without any evidence that it's anything like that. There was no reason to do that. And it struck me from the beginning that it could well be that they're just trying to stop discussion.
Yeah.
And
that's what they want to do. They want to use their sort of techie explanations to shut down any other discussion.
Yeah.
And I think the problem has been for them, or it's not really been much of a problem, is that because we've now got access to all this information, they have to publish it because that's in their sort of constitutional mandate, and NASA really. We can access it and we can analyse it ourselves using our own software, our own techniques and our own discussion as we are here today. So they've got to manage that. They've got to manage that process because they don't want to lose their funding.
Because as far as looking for life goes, we've mentioned microbial life and plant life actually just now, but there's a guy who did some work maybe about 10 years ago that you discussed in your book, who discovered possibly the first evidence of animal life.
Yes, that was Ron Bennett. And again, like the Alan D. Moen study, he basically took the data from the Phoenix lander, just NASA's own images, and he created time-lapse movies. That's all he did. That's all he did. It's trivial. You can do that with uploading the pictures into a web page to create these animated GIFs now.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost you anything. And that's what he did. Okay, he had to go through thousands of images, which he did over many months, maybe even years. But sure enough, he was able to see things on these time-lapse sequences that he generated from their images where these little things appear to move. Move in a way that was like they look like little bugs. And I put a picture in the book of a tardigrade, which are these extremophiles. So it appears from Ron Bennett's research, which, I wrote to him about it as well when I was putting that book, and he never replied. So, all these people seem to have got bored and moved on to something else because they've realised they're just banging their heads against a wall with NASA. They're not going to say, oh, yeah, thanks very much. Oh, we'll put that on. We'll write a paper about that. We'll pass that to Dr. So-and-so, and he'll write a paper, and then we'll all know that we've got these tardigrades on Mars. Job done, No, that doesn't happen. Same with the fossils. It's the same story with these fossils, which is the Charles Schultz material where he wrote this Fossil Hunter's Guide to Mars. And there's other people that have looked at this. And I think Gil Levin, he even talked about fossils at some point earlier on. I think so, just in passing, I think. I could have got that wrong. But anyway, the main guy that did it was Charles Schultz. Yeah. And he was going to do a conference for some NASA people, and he got bounced from the conference. This was going back 10, 15 years. But he found all the evidence, like you say, of the crinoid, and he found evidence of a trilobite. There's a picture of that he's got in his book, his PDF book. And again, he couldn't get anyone to answer. And this guy, he worked in aerospace. He worked for Martin Marietta Airspace. He worked on one of the cruise missile projects.
When Viking landed on Mars, and the first photograph he took back was the blue sky image. Can you tell us what happened in later images?
Yeah, well, that was they came through onto the NASA monitors in mission control, and it had this sort of, it wasn't a sort of pale blue sky, but it had a fairly bluish tinge to it. And I mentioned that what happened in the book, and this was related in Barry de Gregorio's book and Gilbert Levin's book, Mars Living Planet, which I think you'd mentioned you'd started reading that, hadn't you, fairly recently? Yeah. because I haven't read that book, but they related that story that in Mission Control, once they saw this sort of bluish sky coming through, a few minutes later somebody came in and said, we've got to adjust all these monitors now, and they turned them all so it showed a red sky.
Yeah, there was a whistleblower from who was working there at the time. He was a PhD. I think was he Scandinavian guy, and so he was a bit disgruntled about it. It specifically names the principal researcher who was.
I might even have his name in the book. I can't remember that specific detail, but yeah. So they immediately they got that first image, they started tweaking it, and then in a Horizon documentary, which I quote in the book, I think. They said that when they got the first pictures, they noticed that the cables on the rover were too orange. So they had to change the colour calibration. And that's just rubbish because they had image calibration charts in front of the cameras for that very purpose. They didn't do it based on the colour of the flipping cables. Again, why change the colour of the sky, for heaven's sake? Why is that such an issue?
Exactly. Why would it be a problem that the Mars
has it ended up with a blue sky?
Like the clouds are cleared here and we've got a blue sky. That happens because of Rayleigh scattering.
Yeah,
why would Rayleigh scattering not happen on Mars? We'd expect it to actually. Yeah. You'd get still like red skies, like we get red skies, but it wouldn't be that different. It'd be fainter because it's a thinner atmosphere.
Yeah, so I mean, was that? I mean, maybe if you do, this is something I haven't calculated. If you look at how thin the Martian atmosphere actually is, maybe you could calculate the amount of Rayleigh scattering that should occur, and you should be able to calculate what the colour of the sky should be from the sun. Now, I've never done that because I'm not clever enough to do it, but I bet that would be possible. So it'd be interesting to see what that actually came out as, because that might again give us a clue as to why, if it indeed the sky on Mars should be blue, based on calculations of the atmosphere that we were given in terms of the characteristics of it, should it really be blue? And if it shouldn't be blue from the actual taking the gaseous composition of the atmosphere based on the spectroscope.
We're talking about a clear day when there's no
on a clear day, no cloud, which is most of the days. There's not that much cloud on Mars. You can mainly see the surface most of the time. That would then be pretty good evidence that it's on Earth, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
in other words, if it turned out from the Rayleigh scattering calculations of the Martian atmosphere that it was impossible for the Martian sky to be blue under more or less any circumstances, that would pretty much make us sure that the rovers are on Earth.
There's a well-known photograph of Mars taken from the Hubble Space Telescope, and I don't recall if it's in your book. I'm pretty sure it will be because it's quite well-known.
No, I don't think it is. I know the one you mean.
Yeah, and it shows Mars with some wispy white clouds. This is from the Hubble Space Telescope.
Yeah, that's right.
And if you look around the periphery of the disk, you see blue colour in the atmosphere.
Yes, you could be right.
But as far as the actual colour of it, could well be that. Well, the bottom line is, why suppress blue sky images? But it might be that Mars doesn't have a blue sky all the time. It could be that there's periodic changes.
Could be, yeah.
To
we
the
don't know.
Atmospheric composition.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, this is the thing. We don't know enough, and we can't trust what they tell us because we know that what they've given us, they've gone back on. Simple stuff, as we said about the water and stuff.
Yeah, the problem with the colour calibration targets. One of the main things that stuck out for me was, with the Mars exploration rover's Spirit and Opportunity, they had like a joystick, like
that's right,
with four colours around it. And the fascinating thing was this is what really got me hooked into the subject.
I think I know what you'll say. Yeah.
And the images with it, you had was it green, blue? They had a red and then a yellow, was it? I forget the
exact colours also.
But the weird part was you had the blue was showing up as bright red.
Blue changed to red, yeah. Cause
blue was red and the other one was brown.
So they clearly done a colour substitution.
Yeah, well the problem is if you have your fleece, you got your kind of nice blue fleece.
That's right, yeah. The SPF.
If you sit in a darkened room and I shine a red light on you of just a red frequency, and that'll only absorb blue frequency.
Correct.
If it's a blue target, it'd be black. It will show up.
Very dark.
If you're lucky, you might get some reflection,
but
it'd be black. It wouldn't show up as bright. The other
that's
colour.
The giveaway.
That's the giveaway that the data was different. We know that they used the colour the photographs when they took the photographs. They'd have like red, green, and blue, but they'd also take infrared, because that's helped. Technically, it does help in looking at the contrast in the rocks for geological purposes.
That's right.
So there's a engineering reason why they would do that. But they were selling passing these images off as true colour images. But yeah, the clincher was really what happened to the green. Like you said, it turns brown, doesn't it?
Something like that,
on the images. And then you have questions of why in the European Space Agency's photograph taken from the Mars Express.
Mars Express, yep. They have the chlorophyll, yep.
Of what's it called? Gusev crater, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, that's the one.
and you have what looks like a meteorite. You got the crater, but you had like a patch of green in the photograph.
And then, of course, we can go way back to Viking, because Gil Levin, as you know, and we talked about this last time he came, he talked about the algae on 2 photographs that
lichen,
had grown.
Yeah, he was looking at lichen.
Lichen or algae or something.
Growing on the rocks.
And this was photographs from Viking 76 that were taken 2 or 3 or 4 weeks apart, wasn't it? And that's right. And he wrote a paper about that.
Yeah, basically the colour of the Martian rocks at the landing site.
Yeah, changed in that time. So,
So yeah, the idea of suppressing the suppression of colours is there. The suppression
I believe so. Yes.
Evidence for life life has got
any type of life on Mars.
Refuting any positive indication of something that doesn't go away from Mars being a dead, desolate, uninteresting.
Yeah, that's what they're doing.
Geologically rich, but nothing else. Planet.
That's right. That's what they're doing.
And
they've been doing that for 40 years. That's the thing. Now we can look back on 40 years worth of press releases and image releases and so forth, and the pattern has been the same. As we said earlier on in the interview, they'll announce life and then they'll say, no, actually we're wrong, and then they'll announce it again, say, no, we're wrong. They'll announce methane, no methane. They'll announce water, no, actually, well, wasn't really that significant as we thought, because there's not much of it or something, And the same with the fossils. It's the same story with these fossils. The Charles Schultz material. Schultz, again, clever guy, spent years doing the research, and using NASA's own data, not some stuff he just got out of a UFO book. It's NASA's own data, and they're not interested. And that in of itself brings us to the other thing that Richard Hall and I spoke about, and it was really Richard that made me think this way when he looked at some of the rover missions. Is okay, so we've got the blue sky issue. That's what they tried to cover up. We know that they tried to cover up the blue sky issue. That's fairly well established by Gil Levin, by Holger Isenberg, by Hoagland. I think people like some of the Mars investigation team talked about that as well a little bit. Blue sky issue, the moving microbes issue, the bacteria issue, the water issue. Those 4 issues NASA won't really properly talk about. They won't go there really, not in any meaningful way. Does that mean that the rovers are actually not on Mars? Does it mean that what they're picking up is actually Earth data? So the microbes are Earth-based, the blue sky is what we have on the Earth anyway, and the fossils that they've seen are actually fossils in Earth rocks, because, like the moon landings were hoaxed, the rovers were hoaxed.
So the explanation, I guess, is to put that clear, is that before they go to the moon, before they go to Mars, they'll run the rover on the Earth to make sure it works.
Correct.
And the suggestion is that the data we get back isn't from that one; it's from the one that's still on the Earth.
Or they've got them like one of the sites that was suggested was this place in Canada, which is called
Devon Island.
Devon Island. That's correct. 300 miles long. Uninhabited.
So this is actually
northern
where
Canada.
They did the real trials.
They did some. I think they did some real trials there, or either they did them there, or it was somewhere that was very like there. On
that topic, Fox Mulder, I want to believe. I really want to believe went to Mars, but when you open, well, not that I open up the Sun, I don't read the Sun newspaper, but when you get the kind of these ridiculous articles in the mainstream newspaper, and all they'll discuss is like. I don't know, whale bones found on the Mars. On Mars. It's like, well, or a rat. There's one. I lose interest and haven't looked at most of those. However, you have to kind of think that, well, maybe it is a rat because maybe it's just not there. Maybe it's not. Yeah. So this is a possibility that Richard Hall, when I discussed a few years ago now, and I think we have to entertain that possibility. Who was
once
the guy
to do all this stuff. Douglas Gibson. He did a lot of research on that and came up with some very interesting things, which are in Richard Hall's program, which people can go back and watch if they want to dig that out of the web page and so forth. And so we have to consider that as a very strong possibility as part of the shenanigans, because that would then explain why this would help to explain quite a bit why they're behaving like it is, because they can't reveal that what they're actually showing us is actually Earth data, and they're pretending it's from Mars. That would make sense. It becomes easy to kind of understand the particular way in which it's being done. I'm not saying that proves it, but it gives you a. It's like the moon landings thing, isn't it? It's like they can fake the moon landings, but it doesn't mean they didn't go to the moon. Correct. Two different things. Correct. And it doesn't mean they haven't gone to Mars with the secret space program stuff. Yeah. But the other interesting thing which I'll mention here briefly, which Richard came up with, was he found this engineer's blog where it's an engineer that worked on the Mars rover, and there's a very long and detailed explanation of how they were trying to debug some of the rover software or something, or they had to change the way it worked because the hardware developed a fault or something, and they had to work around it, something like that. And this guy who worked on it was he needed to take a memory dump of the rover, and he took this memory dump, and then he found, because he had the whole memory map of the whole system, for the whole...
We're talking about rover in situ on Mars.
Yeah, on Mars. Yeah.
Right, okay.
So they were remotely debugging it and remotely downloading stuff from it. And they had the whole memory map of the whole system, because it's basically a computer that runs it. And they know where all of, the video RAM is stored and all the I/O is and stuff like this. And where buffers would be that store various bits of data that the rover accumulates. And this guy, because he knew that so well, he saw that there was this data in a place where he expected other data to be.
Okay.
And he downloaded that data, and he found that it was a thumbnail of an image. And he looked at the timestamp on this thumbnail, and he realised that there was another card in the rover, but that he hadn't been made aware of.
More data on the rover.
There was more data in the memory than should have been there.
Memory, but he wasn't aware of the card drive side.
No. So he realised that somehow there must have been another card in the rover, and eventually they worked out it was another radio transmitter. And so they found that
memory managing the whole thing.
So they worked out that there was another. What was happening is there was another way of them getting images to the Earth outside the normal channels. And they worked. And if you go to this blog, it explains it all. And I read it, and it's, as far as I could work out, it's, the IT side stuff all makes sense. The way they describe it, doing a memory dump, doing a memory map, running various pattern matching on the data to find out the filters and filter it all out.
Yeah.
And they found that this data was going to Building 8, I think it was, in NASA.
Oh, because
they worked out. Well, they worked out. I forget exactly how. It's all in this blog. You can read it all. But then what they found was, at the end of all that long explanation, they were able to work out that this rover was transmitting the data to Earth faster than light. And they came up with this conclusion that NASA had a way of transmitting data from the rover faster than light, because it only took like 30 seconds to get here.
Yeah, because it's like 5 minutes, is it?
Yeah, it's about 4 or 5 minutes. And you can read it in the blog.
Yeah.
So, of course, we're looking at that from Richard's, when he said the rovers are on Earth. That, of course, added credence to that, because they didn't come up with that as a possibility. The possibility they ended up with after about a year or 2 years of investigation was that NASA had a method of transmitting data from the Mars rover to Earth at faster than light speeds. That was their conclusion.
Well,
to a secret building in NASA,
it's on Devon Island.
But exactly, so if it's on Devon Island or in the Atacama Desert or somewhere, then that would explain. Again, these guys are anonymous. They don't give their names on the blog. Is this just a made-up story? We don't know. But it was tying that together. It was another little bit of evidence that suggests, yes, we can consider that the rovers may not be on Mars. And the biggest problem with
where do you sit with that idea? If you were, are you on the fence with that? 'Cause
I'm still kind of on the fence, but the biggest problem again is the landing. The same as with Apollo.
The bouncing.
Things like, actually, if you imagine the parachute, for example, that's one of the big problems. If you start to think about the parachute, where they're claiming that this probe is going into the atmosphere and it's travelling X thousand, and we know, it's got rockets to slow down, and obviously it's got a heat shield and so forth. But they were claiming that the parachute, I think, deployed at 100,000 feet or something, and something like that. I forget, or 64,000 feet. You can go and read it. Particularly with the Curiosity rover, which weighed a ton. I think it was Curiosity rover weighed a ton, right? So you've got this parachute deploying in the Martian atmosphere,
which is 0.6% of the Earth's atmosphere. So that's the point of this being,
right.
Yeah.
And if you go and talk to a skydiver, they will tell you that if you try to open your parachute at 15,000 feet on Earth, it won't open properly, because the atmosphere
it won't actually open because of the air rush.
Because the air is not sufficient to inflate the parachute properly at 15,000 feet. The air pressure is too low, or the air is too thin at 15,000 feet. So again, you start to think about, and there was this.
Like I said, they do have the jets, or the rockets.
They do have retro rockets, but again, you're thinking about the parachute with some of the earlier rovers and stuff. I don't know,
It makes you wonder. It really makes you wonder when you start to look at those things. So, there is definitely much more to the Mars story than they will ever admit, both in terms of what they've. If we assume that the rovers are there, just take that, what they found there, then they won't even talk about the fossils publicly. You know, they'll just say. In fact, that fossil that they did find, the crinoid, that was drilled out, as you probably remember.
The first thing they did was drill into it.
Yeah, like the next day or something on the afternoon after they discovered it. You know, they put a drill on it. Why would you do that? So some of these things become pretty obvious that something very, very serious is something very seriously wrong.
So it's quite a complex
programs.
puzzle. It's quite a complex puzzle, isn't it? Because at one level, I'm kind of thinking that you got evidence for microbial life, and then you got potential evidence for plant life and then animal life. And you're kind of leading up to the idea that, well, if there is intelligent extraterrestrial life out there, maybe there's this history that Mars, and that's where maybe where these supposed artifacts come from. But the fact that if we're not even clear that they're even there in the first place, none of this evidence of the suppression is probably the wrong word, but they're messing around with, I suppose, the data on with evidence for reduced bacterial life, for example, makes you kind of wonder, well, yeah, could it be that it is just they're just not, this is not the real data, it's
maybe
fake, the entire thing is fake data.
Maybe
it reminds me of something that the astronomer Thomas van Flandern said in one of his lectures. He said he was showing it. He obviously looked at the face of Mars and looked at the evidence. But what was more interesting is that he said, well, you got this kind of evidence, and you got the evidence of the face of Mars and Cydonia, but you add all the probabilities of it being artificial. From the outset, it could be geology, it could just be random chance, but the probability stacks up so high that eventually you get to the point where such a high probability, you have to say, well, they asked the question, does this mean there is extraterrestrial intelligent life? And he said, well, the answer to that is no, because they might have faked the entire space program. It's more likely that they've done so.
Yeah, and it was interesting that you told me that, because I wasn't, before you told me earlier, just before we started recording this, I didn't know he'd said that, so it's very interesting, yeah.
Yeah, it's just, I'm very interested in the work of Thomas van Flandern, because you mentioned his website, Meta Research. I think
I referred to him because of, in fact, they ended up doing that press conference right after, I think it was right before or right after the Disclosure Project one. I think it was like within 2 days.
Oh, really?
It was Brian O'Leary, Tom Van Flandern, and Michael Luckman. They did that presentation. I think, I forget where it was now, but it was like.
Is this in 2001?
Yeah, and it was when they were doing the talking about the image release of the face from Mars Global Surveyor. They did a whole press conference about that, and that was about 2 days after the Disclosure Project press conference, which was kind of weird.
Do you have any kind of hope that things might change, or do you think this is
no? Because not in any great way. I think the thing that has changed is, as I said earlier, for those that are really curious and want to get to the bottom of it and are prepared to keep their wits about them and invest the time, they can find, the truth, as most of the truth. In other words, which is what I've just said up to now. I challenge anyone to sort of dispute anything once they've done the research of what I've said in this interview and the other ones that I've done like it. So that, the information is there. We've got terabytes and petabytes of data from Mars. We can all go and look at for free. We just need a computer and the time to do it. And what you also need to do is you need to study things like astronomy. If you're not familiar with it already, get a bit of a science grounding, a bit of a maths background, bits and bobs, enough so that you know that you're not being deceived. That's been my background, as I've said many times before. I'm not a geologist, I'm not a physicist, but I can do maths. I can do, up to A-level maths.
Physics. So you did physics.
Yes, correct. But it was a second part of my degree. I did computer science and physics. Because back in those days, there wasn't really enough computing stuff that you could do necessarily, or at least I chose not to do all of that, and I chose to do a bit of physics.
Yeah.
So do a physics course, go online. Okay, try and avoid the crap they tell you about quantum theory and things like that, but do a physics course. Go to the OpenLearn website and do an OpenLearn free physics course. And get assessed and get some competency at it, because what you're doing is you're building up your mental arsenal to be able. Even if you can't challenge these people face to face, in a forum, because they've got all their PhDs and research published papers and blah, 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 you can at least know in yourself whether they're bullshitting you or not,
And that's an objective that you can try and move towards the best that you can.
Do you think, in a way, in that period of when Mars Global Surveyor was arriving at Mars, and then through the years through the Mars Exploration Rover program, which was like say 98 through to 2006 and 7, that was like the kind of glory years of the internet in a sense, where it was free and open, and that's changed, hasn't it? So what we had prior to that was TV, radio, other media, which was controlled. And we've getting to the point where this new media, which is the internet, is getting to that point where being controlled again. So there was this window of time where the controlling, when I say controlled, you have all the certain information is allowed for whatever reason. There was free reign of information through those NASA missions at that time. To a degree, we have to say, to a degree.
I think,
and that perks people's interest. But I feel like now we're at a point where, with this new mission, for example, we don't have the openness of our ability to access it. We have to take things on trust.
I think there's a couple of things I'd say in response to that. Certainly, that I think that was what you're saying is kind of true, and I think that was starting to change quite strongly with the Curiosity mission, whereas that was clearly being kind of stage managed, and that press conference they did, which Richard Hall discussed in his video. When they had the landing, I think that was in 2012, they had the landing. Clearly there was something not right with that press conference. So we can see that they were trying to look open, by having this press conference, look at this wonderful, but they're trying too hard, exactly. And they're putting too much spin on it. But the other big problem now is noise. It's not so much that we don't have access to the information, and we don't, that we can still get all those NASA images. Every single image that I've spoken about and all the images in my book are still, as far as I know, if you click on those links in that book, you'll get those images. You'll get them straight up, no problem. They're not censored, not been deleted. But what you will find instead now is you'll find 1,000 YouTubers who don't give you their name. They don't tell you what qualifications they've got. They won't give you a frank and honest discussion. What they'll do is they'll make an hour-long video. Oh, look at this rock. Oh, that definitely proves that, say, the rover's not on Mars. This is an Earth rock. Or they'll say, this proves the whole space program is fake. Or they'll say, oh, well, I think this is proof that there's this sort of machine that the Martians had or something. So they'll come out with all this stuff, some of which might be true, some of which might be accurate. But for example, they won't reference the image. If they've processed the image, they won't tell you how they've processed it. So it's just very sort of slapdash.
It's not scientific, and this is one of the problems. I think this is a completely different subject, but ufology is that ufology was at the cusp of being used being the scientific discipline up until what's his name? The guy at 60s,
Condon.
Sorry, yes, Edward Condon. So it's the Edward Condon report. So up to the years up to the Condon report, you had scientists were able to do work and without too much ridicule. There was a silly season stuff and all the silly media stuff like you get all the time, but it was taken seriously. That put a lid on it and stopped academics taking it seriously. Well, what happened there is it was left to any man and his dog to do it. So anybody but scientists would do it, and when the scientists did it, they just didn't talk about it as UFOs, and they kept it to themselves or shared it within a smaller community, and we never got to know about it. And I think what you're suggesting about what's happening with Mars research is kind of the same thing. Is that it's just left to other people to sort out, and they just don't do very good jobs of it. You mentioned YouTubers. There's a lot of people putting absolute BS on there.
That's right.
There's a lot of people presenting really good data, but not very well, and not without citing references, without showing you how they've done it, and not even because you mentioned the machines and this kind of thing. You reminded me of the astronomer Thomas Van Flanden's suggestion about them marks, what they call linear paths that they find touching craters. I forget.
I'm not familiar with that. No, it's new to me.
Yeah, I forget what they even called them. And he suggests machinery, and that's why I've considered what I thought. But the weird part is that they only touch the edge of. It's like they never cut
tangents.
Through, they never cut through meteoric craters. They only ever touch the tip of the side of them, which is unusual in its own right. But you watch videos on YouTube, which I've kind of given up doing really now because there's so much kind of, like I say, BS. So you'll never learn things from it because you don't know what the source information. You have to go to the root source. And that's what I love about your books, is that you do actually cite all these things. And I think some of the one thing I did notice that some of the Mail Space Science Systems references are dead. They've changed the website recently. So if you see the Mail and Space Science Systems website, You won't see
That's
them,
right. I found that. I think
the
they
Wayback Machine. You can still find them by using
That's
the Wayback
right.
Machine.
But I found that you can change the links a certain way and get back to them because they've just changed the domain or something, or subdomain, something like that. But I
had to use the Wayback Machine actually just to get to some of the data.
Yeah.
But yes, that's the thing. The fact you've actually referenced your material is something most people
Yeah,
don't do.
there's about 600 references in there.
It comes from experience because you're educated and you've worked in, well, you work for universities in a different capacity, but you know how things are supposed to work and how you can share information in a way that helps us.
That's it. And I think that's something that people are, so we get a lot of lay people watching our videos and talking to us and come to the talks and stuff.
Yeah.
We don't get any, that's half the problem. The people like Richard and myself, although we're not professional scientists, sometimes people think we are, but we're not. We're engineers, we have an engineering background. And we have never published a scientific paper, but we're sufficiently familiar that we've studied such things for our other work when we're at uni and doing bits of research, that we know how things should be presented. And so you have to develop experience of that. If you're going to make videos, if you're going to write articles, if you're going to write books, you want to practice those skills. And that, as my OU tutoring, which has nothing to do with the stuff that we're talking about, but they practice those skills. They practice referencing. They're taught why you need to reference stuff, which of course is obvious, to check that you're not just making stuff up, but this is the problem now. That the problem and the solution are the same, in that we've got vast information that we've got access to, but that gives the opportunity to generate a vast amount of noise. We're putting a random image up, not saying where you've got it from, cropping out a bit of it, not saying which bit it is, etc., etc. So it's just as easy to generate noise, and anyone, of course, can switch on their phone, flip it open now, sit in this chair, open their phone, YouTube stream, click that button, hello, I'm an expert on Mars or 9/11 or Brexit, and say whatever they like. And that, depending on how the video is done, might get 100,000 views in a few hours, depending on where it is.
People expressing opinions, and that's something different to
of course.
Spinning.
But so in other words, I suppose you've got to have the filters of working better. In any subject, not just Mars stuff.
Critical thinking is
critical thinking has become even more important now than it was. But not critical thinking of the government as much. That's still important, all the government bodies and NASA. But critical thinking also, you've got direct the critical thinking at the NASA and all those people in academia. But you've also got to direct it against the armies of YouTubers that just half of them don't know what they're talking about. They have no clue what they're talking about. Flat Earth. I'll say those two words and leave it at that. That has had a huge impact on all this field of stuff.
It's almost like a social experiment, really, isn't it?
It's an intellectual virus that's been deliberately created and spread into the population. I have little doubt about that. And people don't realise they've been infected with it. That's the problem.
Yeah. Well, thank you for taking time out of your day to chat with me, Andrew, about this.
You're very welcome. Thanks for...
It's been very interesting and very informative, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you very much, Anthony, for taking the time to do the interview, and I very much enjoyed our chat too.
Thank you. Cheers, Andrew.